Hello, everybody, and welcome to what I think is the sixth episode of Tipsy's F1 podcast. I am your host, Tipsy Pineapple. I've just finished an amazing live stream where I've met a bunch of amazing new people. It's just really cool to see the channel actually growing again. I forgot that whenever somebody subscribes to my YouTube channel, it says, "What has happened? We need to know." And then it just makes things fly all over the screen, which is just, I thought it was so funny and hilarious. Anyways, today was a special day because I just remembered that Fantasy Formula 1 exists. This is basically where you create a fantasy F1 team. You just say, like, this is my team of all the drivers that I'm going to pick. You kind of get given a cost cap of like $100 million. Now, for perspective, obviously Max Verstappen is the most expensive driver. I think they base the prices off of everyone's... Well, I don't know what they base the prices off of because obviously there's rookies in here now. So it's just they try to base the prices off, you know, the best rated driver will be more expensive and the least rated driver will be the cheapest. I remember last year when K-Mag was coming back in, he was coming back into a Haas, and people were like, hang on, Haas is supposed to be better this year, and K-Mag's actually pretty good. And Valtteri Bottas as well, going into the Alfa Romeo, like, he was quite a cheap driver who was doing really well early on, because we had seen preseason testing, and I think they set the cost of the drivers before preseason testing had occurred. So overall, they have this rating system where they tell you, okay, drivers cost this much, and you want to build your team, and you have to select 5 drivers and 2 constructors. But Max alone costs more than $250,000, or let's say dollars in quotation marks. And Red Bull also costs a little bit more than $250,000. So if you pick Max and Red Bull, that's half your budget gone. You still have to pick another constructor team, and you have to pick more drivers. So it's quite interesting. Then you also have the option of picking a DRS boost, which basically you just say, I choose this to be my primary driver that I've selected, and I want him to get double points. Now, I think most people will pick Max. I think most people think that Max will be world champion again. But if you think it will be someone else and it is actually somebody else, and you DRS boost them, you're going to get a lot more points than everybody else, which is just really cool and interesting. So there's multiple strategies of how you can build your team. You could either pick Max Verstappen and pick Leclerc as your 2 top drivers, and then pick other midfield drivers that you think are going to do better than what their actual valuation is. That's the strategy that I went for. I just picked the top drivers and top teams, like as a start, like Max and Leclerc were my drivers, and then I picked Red Bull and Ferrari because I just think they're going to do really well, and then I picked some really cheap drivers. I'm actually going to go through my teams later, but let's talk about the team creation. You can build up to 3 teams. I've chosen to build 3 teams just for the fun of it, but I only really wanted to focus on my main team, the first team. And there are actually prizes, like real life prizes if you do well. But I think so many people are entering this, like some people to get first, second, third, they're really cool prizes. Well, third's not that cool, but the other prizes are really cool, but you're going to be struggling to win those prizes because there's going to be so many other people playing this game. As I said, I played last year. It was really cool, but I didn't really follow it throughout the season. So this year I'm going to be more intentional about it, and I'm going to bring it up in the podcasts as well when we talk about after the race, how my fantasy team is doing, etc., etc. I'm just really excited for it. I think it's going to be great. This year they've introduced a new concept called chips, which are basically these little things that help power up your team. I'm going to talk a little bit about those various chips now because they are new, and let's just cover them right now off the get-go. So the chips, there are 6 chips available in total that you can use. 3 of them you can actually use like right away as you wanted to. I think you have access to all 6 chips, like you get just 1 of each chip and you can just use them throughout the season. The way they've mentioned it is that 3 of them you can use straight away. Those are the autopilot, the extra DRS boost, and the no negative chips. The remaining 3 will be unlocked after the team's second race, which makes sense as I tell you what they all do. So the autopilot chip, which is the first one, this will change the DRS boost selection and give it to the highest scoring driver in your team, if that turns out to be different to your original choice, basically. So essentially, if I said, okay, cool, Max is going to be my DRS booster, but in this race I think Ocon's going to win for some reason, and Ocon is one of my drivers, I could play my autopilot chip and it will automatically give my DRS boost to Ocon instead of Max for that race weekend. But obviously you don't really know what's going to happen. You could probably tell by qualifying. I think you have to choose before the weekend. You'll probably get an idea throughout the week that maybe the driver's got like a penalty or something. Your main DRS boosted driver is going to have a penalty, but you think one of your other drivers will do really well, so you can move the DRS boost to them. It's just one of those things where you want to look at the weekend and how it's going. My plan and strategy with all these chip things is actually to just ignore them at the start and use them later on when I have a better idea of what's actually going to happen in the races, because the start of the season is just so hard to tell what's going to happen. I don't think it's worth using your chips right away in the start of the season. You can, but I think it's a waste. The next chip that I'm going to talk about, chip number 2, is the extra DRS boost chip. Now this chip is a huge 3 times multiplier on their score for the next Grand Prix weekend. You basically give this to a driver and you say, okay, I want to give a DRS boost to another driver. You don't want to do it to the driver that you already have the 2 times DRS boost. This is for an additional driver where you'll get a 3 times boost. So again, if you've got 2 drivers, you've put a DRS boost on the one of them, you can apply a chip to the other driver if you think that that other driver is going to do better. I think a lot of these chip stuff will make more sense as you start playing through and seeing how it works, but let me just go through the other chips. There's a no negative chip that you can look at. This is mostly if you think that all your drivers that you picked are just going to have a really bad weekend. Let's say they're like not going to finish, etc, etc, etc. I don't know why you'd think that, because you have to select these chips before the race weekend starts. But if you just have a bad feeling about your drivers and you think, okay, well, for context, you do get negative points. Like if your driver doesn't get classified, you lose a lot of points. So if you've picked a driver who crashes a lot, you're going to lose a lot of points. This happened to me last year when I picked Mick Schumacher, and there were a lot of races where he just didn't classify. He didn't qualify, he didn't race. So I just lost a lot of points thanks to Mick, unfortunately, when I thought he was going to do really well. So if I'd picked another driver instead of Mick that, just finished 20th, he wouldn't have lost as many points as Mick did because Mick kept crashing. I'm sure this no negative chip would have been very useful for me in Jeddah last year when Mick crashed there. And then we move on to the wildcard chip. This just lets you do unlimited changes to your team. So you also have to stay in the cost cap, so you can't just pick like any drivers. You've got to still stay in that cost cap of drivers. Like again, every driver costs money and every team costs money, and you've got to sort of balance those funds appropriately. But this wildcard chip lets you just completely change your team up. And that's just great, because in general, you can only make 2 driver transfers for free throughout the year before they start deducting points from your score. And I think deducting points is really going to hurt you a lot, and you don't want to make too many changes. But sometimes it just makes sense. Maybe something happens where like a driver gets injured and he's not going to be in the season anymore. That's what I would save those transfers for. A lot of these cases are actually just on real life scenarios. If you hear someone has COVID and they can't race or something like that, like if you picked Lance Stroll and then suddenly you realize now his wrist is broken, you'd probably be like, hey, hang on a second, maybe I want to change my transfers for a little bit. Or maybe you decide that you think Lance Stroll's going to do well, but you know that he's not going to do well right away. You're going to wait a bit and then save your driver transfer for after Lance Stroll is back and running in the car again. You see that there's scenarios where these chips make sense, but you want to kind of save them because they can be useful for these real rogue events that happen. There's a limitless chip which works very similar to the wildcard chip, except this one lets you choose literally anyone, and then you have no cost cap for this race. And then after the weekend happens, the whole race weekend happens, after that all happens, you will end up going back to your original lineup before you use this limitless chip. That limitless chip is it's pretty insane. It's essentially the guess the top 5 drivers for this weekend chip, which I don't know, maybe it makes sense where you want to use it. Maybe after a while, like, hey, look, no other teams have come close to the top 6, and you just know, like, okay, well, like if I just do the limitless chip here, I know that, let's say Red Bull and Mercedes are ahead, I can pick those 2 cars and not have to worry about cost caps. And I'll just be like, you know what, this is my chip where I'm going to go all out. So I'm going to make a bold prediction that this is going to be the top 5 driver lineup in the top 2 teams. That's where you would use that chip. And then finally, we have the final fix chip. This is also a useful one you'd want to look at on a Saturday afternoon after qualifying. If you might see that one of your drivers does really badly after qualifying, but with this all, you get to do a big fix where you just decide, okay, I want to change my drivers now between qualifying and the race. This is one of those like last minute changes, because I don't think you can in general change your drivers mid-race weekend. I think you have to wait till after a race has occurred before you can make changes to your team, because otherwise people would be changing their drivers between qualifying and the race all the time, and that would just not be fun for the game, because the main point of this game is to just do one prediction today and have that be your prediction throughout the year and just do tweaks here and there very rarely. So they've limited you to just doing it with your one and only chip. So that's a reason you might want to use that chip. Anyway, that's the chips and how they work. I didn't realize it speaks so long about that, but it's useful. I should probably talk about how we score points and how we lose points. So let's go talk about that. Right off the bat, you won't really see any leaderboards. Just wanted to mention that up front. Like, you only get to see them after the first race. This is kind of to protect people's original picks. So the picks that I've made, I will make public, but most people want to keep their picks a secret because they want to go for the win and they don't want anyone copying them and trying to piggyback off their successful picks or what they think will be their successful picks. So the rules, you can make 2 free transfers per team ahead of each Grand Prix. So that's just your 2 free transfers before you get points taken off. I'll talk about the point system now. They've introduced something this season for overtakes. You win points for every overtake your driver makes, which is really cool. So we have that most overtakes thing. There's also a pit stops award. So, you know, we have fast pit stops. Now, the fastest teams will score points for your fantasy team if they top the timing charts, which is another little interesting dynamic to this. It keeps the scores more variable, which is going to make it for a really interesting season. And obviously, I've already spoken about the chips. That's another new thing. So the way points work, let's talk about qualifying. In qualifying, it's pole position, first place, they score 10 points, and then second will be 9th, 3rd, 8th, all the way down to 10th place that gets 1 point. And then obviously 11th to 20th gets 0 points. But if the guys do not set a time in qualifying, this basically just means if they don't even make it to Q3, then you're going to lose 5 points. So you've got to be wary for cars that might be bad with reliability because that will affect your score. And if a driver is disqualified during qualifying, you lose 15 points. So you might want to be careful with drivers that tend to make a lot of mistakes to the point where they might get disqualified. Then there's a constructors thing for qualifying as well. If neither driver reaches Q2, you lose a point. If one driver reaches Q2, you get a point. If both drivers reach Q2, you get 3 points. If one driver reaches Q3, you get 5 points. And then if both drivers reach Q3, you get 10 points. So that's a constructor thing to look at as well. You want to look for consistency in your drivers with your constructors that you pick as well. Regarding sprint races, positions gained, you get 1 point per position. And if you lose a position, it's 1 point as well. Then the number of overtakes made, you get 1 point per overtake. So they could make overtakes on each other, on other people, and lose positions, gain positions, lose positions, and you'll get points for every time they re-overtake. So that's kind of cool. So you really want to look at those drivers who qualify badly but then do lots of overtakes in a race because you'll get some points back there. But I mean, qualifying well and finishing well is also good. But it does also just mix up the midfield a bit, which is nice. Fastest lap in the sprint gives you 5 points. Sprint results, the points you get for this is pretty much identical to real life. First place is 8 points, all the way down to 8th place you get 1 point. From 9th to 20th it's 0. If they DNF, you lose 20 points. So again, you really want them to get classified. And if the driver is disqualified, you lose 25 points. I know I'm mentioning a lot of points here, but yeah, it is what it is. The race, similar thing, positions gained, you gain a point per position. Positions lost, you lose a point per position. So again, if Max qualifies on pole, but then he, I don't know, gets a tire puncture and ends up 20th, you lose like 20 points. So that's something worth worrying about and being concerned about. But, you know, it's rare that happens. You've accepted that I've picked Max as my number one driver. Not because I love him, just because I think he's going to win. I mean, I do like him. I think he's cool. I think all the drivers are pretty cool, to be honest. But yeah, overtakes made, they get a point per overtake. Fastest lap, they get 10 points in the race. Driver of the day is another one. So this might affect me voting for my driver of the day, because I'll just go vote for, well, whichever driver I think did really well on the day. If they're one of my selected drivers, I'll vote them my driver of the day. So that's also one of those things. It's one of those things where it gets a bit weird because you're looking at predictions versus what you actually want. And those can often be two different things. So it gets a bit mixed and mangled there. Regarding race results, the points that you get match the point system in real life. So first 25, second 18, third 15, etc. All the way down to 10th gets 1 point. Again, 11th to 20th, 0 points. But if they're DNF, it's minus 20 points. And if they're disqualified, it's minus 25 points. Constructors, again, we're looking at pit stops now in the race. They have pit stops. Fastest pit stop will get 10 points. The second fastest pit stop will get 5 points. The third fastest will get 3 points. It is possible for one of your constructors to do 3 pit stops and all 3 of them be the top 3 pit stops. So if you select Red Bull and they do the first, second, and third fastest pit stop, you get 18 points, which is 10 plus 5 plus 3. Then finally, the team management. This is mostly like you saying you've messed up and you wanted to change your teams. If you go past those 2 free driver transfers that you had, it's 4 points per additional transfer. And then creating a team after the team lock deadline, which, by the way, is the first race, that's going to minus 10 points as well. So you don't want to do that. You really want to get your team going now, because as of the time I'm recording this, it's pretty much like 3.5 days. And by the time this comes out, it's going to be 2.5 days. So if you're listening to this podcast, go on to F1 Fantasy and start creating your team while you continue to listen to this podcast and I talk about it. Let's talk about the prizes. So the prizes, there's 3 prizes for the top 3 people. So again, you're competing with like hundreds and thousands of people, potentially millions of people. So it's very unlikely you're going to win. But, it's fun anyway. First prize gives you 2 F1 Experiences Championship Club passes to a 2024 Grand Prix. So that's like those VIP vibes. Second place prize, that gives you 2 grandstand tickets to a 2024 Grand Prix, which is pretty cool. That's solid. That's something I would go if there was one in South Africa. I totally would book my own grandstand tickets, so that's cool. And then third prize, you get 1 year subscription of F1 TV, which is like for third place, and all you get is that. I mean, that's not much. You make like, I don't know. It's not much of a prize for a competition involving so many people in an industry that makes so much money. So I'm a bit disappointed with the prize pool, but it's fine. It's one of those little extras to be like, oh, hey, I could win something and that would be pretty cool. But yeah, alas, it is what it is. And then finally, you get leagues. There's a global league, there's a league for the country that you live in, there's a league for the favorite team that you pick, and there's a league for the favorite driver that you've picked. So there's a lot of, it shows you how many teams have picked. Right now in the global league, there's over 500,000 teams already in it, and I think we'll get more than that. In South Africa, I can see there's over 12,000 teams in there. In Ferrari, I see there's over 100,000 teams who have their favorite team as Ferrari, and as their favorite driver, Fernando Alonso. There are over 50,000 teams in there. So that's just like a nice way to see the leagues. I myself have actually made a league. I think it's just called the Tipsy Pineapple League. So you can join that. I'm going to put it in the show notes description. Again, it's also in my Discord. I don't know if I should probably put my Discord link in the show notes as well. I'll probably start doing that soon. Then, yeah. Also, this podcast is everywhere now. I think we finally got it onto Google. I think I might have mentioned that already in my last podcast, but point is, it's there. We are streaming a lot on YouTube. I actually showed building my fantasy picks on YouTube, the live stream today. I've done that earlier today. It was really cool. I'm going to talk about my team selection picks now. I think I've mostly spoken about already, but I want to talk about my other teams as well that I made. But if you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, please do go to youtube.com/tipsy_pineapple. You can find me there. You'll see the little pineapple emoji. It's really cool. And just hit a subscribe. Like it's all you need to do. I really appreciate you guys listening and getting this far through the podcast. Anyway, let's talk about my team. So the first team that I made was I made Max Verstappen my primary driver who has the DRS boost. That cost me 26.9 mil. So that's already a quarter of my budget gone. And then I went with Leclerc, which was 21.2 mil, and that's almost half my budget gone already. So just with those two, I've used a good chunk of my budget. After that, I went with Red Bull Racing as my constructor. Sorry, I'm jumping onto my most expensive constructor stuff here and showing you how little I had to work with. So Red Bull as well, that's 27.2 mil. So if you do the math, I've essentially spent 3/4 of my budget, and I still need to choose one more constructor and 3 more drivers. So my next drivers are going to be very cheap. The constructor that I went with as my second constructor, because I didn't have any money to pick like Mercedes or Ferrari, I picked Aston Martin because they're relatively cheap. They cost me 6.7 mil, so I think that's a real good budget choice. My third driver is Fernando Alonso, who cost 8.3 mil. I think he's pretty good value for money there. And then Nico Hulkenberg is another one, because I was just, at this moment, I had like 10 mil left. Actually, even less. I had like 9.7 or 9.6 left. I ended up going with Nico Hulkenberg, who was worth 4.3 million, and then Nick de Vries was worth 5 mil. Again, like all the other really cheap drivers, they just didn't really cut it for me. A lot of the others cost more, like Kevin Magnussen was a lot more expensive than Nico Hulkenberg, so that's why I went with Hulkenberg instead of K-Mag, and there's just scenarios like that. Also, I think Hulkenberg will be more consistent versus K-Mag. I think K-Mag likes to do some dodgy, dangerous things, and that's going to lose me a lot of points, which I don't want to do. So that was my first team. That's the only team I'm really focusing on. I don't really want to worry about that too much now. The next team is more of a meme team. I call it the Unhealthy Mercedes Hype Team. This is Lewis Hamilton and George Russell, obviously. I was debating who to put my DRS on and whether I put it on Lewis Hamilton or George Russell. I ended up putting it on Russell, mostly because my YouTube chat convinced me to do that, so I've just gone with that. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. It was quite a 50-50 choice for me because I just don't know who's going to do better this year. Again, I added Fernando Alonso, and then I added the 2 Alpine drivers. So bear in mind, Lewis Hamilton cost 23.7 mil and Russell cost 18.6, and with them and Fernando, that's about half my budget gone. I chose Mercedes as constructors, and then Aston Martin again as another constructors team, just because, again, Aston Martin is quite cheap for what you get. They're quite a good car. And Gasly and Ocon are $8.1 and $9.4 million respectively to hire them. And they're just 2 kind of real midfield guys that I had the money, so I just spent my money on them because I couldn't really do like one really expensive driver and then someone who's worth nothing. It worked out that Gasly and Ocon were priced that just fit the budget there. Actually, let me talk about that. My first squad, the Tipsy Pineapple squad, the remaining money I had in the cost cap was 0.4 mil. The remaining money I had in the Unhealthy Mercedes Hype Team, my second team, was 0.1 mil. So I spent like every cent that I could. My third team is even more of a joke. I called this team Saving Money Playing Golf. Now, the reason is because I tried to save as much money as possible, and playing golf, you know how the golf scoring system works. The lower your score, the better you do. So I'm hoping that this team gets the worst score possible. My goal for this team is to be at the absolute bottom of the leaderboard. I might use some of my chips to specifically sabotage my team and just end up worse off. So that's really going to be exciting. I'm quite interested to see how that all works, if I can get the lowest score possible. I doubt I will. I think other people will be doing the same thing. But this team, I went with Logan Sargent and Alex Albon. Logan Sargent has the double DRS bonus, because I just don't think he's going to score any points. Then Yuki Tsunoda, because he's going to crash a lot, so hopefully he'll lose a lot of points for me. And then De Vries. I know I've got De Vries in my top team and my bottom team, so I'm a bit I'm spreading my eggs in multiple baskets here. But De Vries is just one of those drivers that I think will be near the bottom. I'm not relying on him getting points, I'm just relying on him consistently not getting points. I think for him in my main squad, the reason I put him there is because I don't think he's going to lose points. I think he just won't score any points, but it's better to not score points than to be a person who loses points for the team. The other driver I put in was Drogon Ryu. I think I put him there mostly because he was cheap, so I went again with the saving money strategy rather than the he's a bad driver, because he's not a bad driver, but I think he's in a bad car. And I just didn't know who else to put there because I already had the Williams and the AlphaTauri. So the next bottom team I could think of would be Alfa Romeo. And then it became between Bottas and Zhou Guanyu. I think they're pretty evenly matched. I think Zhou Guanyu and Bottas are very good drivers in very bad cars. But again, between the 2 drivers, I think when I looked at the prices, I just went with the guy who was cheaper because I wanted to save money because this is my meme team. And then obviously the 2 constructors I picked were Williams and AlphaTauri because I think they're just both going to be garbage this year. I might be wrong. I kind of hope I am wrong. But at the same time, for the sake of this fantasy pick, I also hope I'm not wrong. I think that's it. I think I've covered pretty much everything there is to it. So I definitely encourage you to do the same thing here. Oh, and by the way, that third team, the cost cap, I spent less than half of the cost cap. I still had 64.3 mil left. You know, after starting with 100 mil, I essentially used up like 35.7 mil. So I saved a lot of money by not picking good drivers and good teams. What blows my mind is that the AlphaTauri is almost the same price as the Aston Martin when it comes to constructors, and that's just weird. And Aston Martin is 6.7, AlphaTauri 6.4 mil, Williams is 5.1. Like, Aston Martin is a really good deal if you're looking for a constructor to pick and you're running low on cash. I think the nice thing is with this is you could also, if you wanted to, just pick some drivers, and then there's a feature that actually automatically fills your team in case you're struggling to think. So this is one of those like, oh, think about it if you want, but if you don't want to think about it, you can just have it autocomplete based off some initial decisions you make. So there's a lot you can do. I've just seen here the team deadline is 3 days and 17 hours. So by the time this episode comes out, you'll probably have 3 days left to do it. But I recommend just doing it as quick as possible, because it's one of those things. You only have to do one thing once, and then you don't really have to think about it for the rest of the year. And then you can just see how you did versus your friends and family. Again, I've set up a league, so any of you listeners who are here, I will leave a link to the league in the podcast description, and you can check it out there. And if you want to talk about the F1 fantasy stuff as well, your predictions and all that stuff, you can talk about it in my Discord, which I'll also leave a link to in the show notes below. But guys, thank you so much for listening, and I will chat to you next time. Have a fantastic one. I look forward to the race weekend beginning this weekend. It's very exciting, and yeah, catch you soon. Cheers.